Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Thursday, November 20th. The time is 7 p.m. Our first item is roll call. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Liz Carp.
Here.
Joe Murphy.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
Caper Wilson.
Here.
Armand Monaco is absent, and Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item under land use is Old Tower Hill Road form-based codes. Jamie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few brief comments tonight on our progress with the form-based code and just a few slides. Again, as I mentioned before, our working document is July 2025. So what we plan on doing is having a sheet that will show any potential recommended changes by the planning board of the 2025 draft that will ultimately go to the council as a recommendation versus constantly changing one document. So basically have one draft, one guiding document for potential changes as recommended by the planning board that goes to council. And if council were to simply take favorable action on the adoption of the plan with the planning board's recommendation, it would be as simple as that. If they add to that, we would have a second addendum where we would have planning board's recommendations. They would be affirmed or modified, and then add what the council would want changed to the July 2025 draft. So as discussed, just a couple of things, and I'll move down a couple pages here, if it will let me. Sorry, because I'm at the end. When you're on the last page, you can't go any further. So one of the primary things was just a brief discussion of the gateway destination. They've changed that to be the Route 1 transition. FB4 would be the, I'm just going to go down to that. Why isn't it going down? The FB4 would be the Route 1 transition area or zone. So again, changing from gateway destination to Route 1 transition. We still have the FB3, FB2. FB 1.5 would be the Main Street transition zone, which is basically from Citizens Bank headed back towards Stedman's along Main Street to the west. We would still have the FB1 residential neighborhood. And just clicking a little too quick here. So again, in orange would be the FB 1.5, that's the Main Street transition zone. And then FB4 to the top right of the slide would be the Route 1 transition segment. FB1, FB2, and FB3 remain the same in title. There was some discussion on within the FB2 zone, which is the lavender color or the lighter purple color, on some of the side streets on how those buildings would need to be orientated. So where you see those red lines, I'll blow this up a little bit. The intent on the side streets is any mixed-use building there would have to be orientated towards the street. So entrances towards the street, not the side or rear. So again, that's a clarification, because I think there was some discussion of what if you had one of the buildings there and it turned its back on the street. And this will clarify that when you're on those side streets specifically, that your buildings have to be orientated towards the road. They can't be orientated in a different manner to establish that street aesthetic that the town is looking for. If I can just go through, because again, I have very minor discussion tonight. Again, this is just a clarification and blow up of what the intent is there. That your public areas, your transition areas would be street facing on Pershing and Patton. And then on the others, we're still looking at the public-private spaces. Let me just scan out here. And then go to one other slide. The other primary discussion that the planning board had was in the FB1 zone, is how to handle things other than single-family homes. In those areas, we presently allow duplexes, and in one of the areas we allow multifamily households to be built, or small apartment buildings or townhouses. So one of the discussions is to, in the FB1 zone, because people were concerned about how big a duplex could be, or if someone did a townhouse, or what could occur there. One of Able City East's recommendations is limit the size of the building. So if a building is limited at 3,600 square feet, again, and we're having these discussions, so my suggestion is even if it's a 3,600 square foot building, that really should be a 2-floor square footage and not a 1-floor square footage, because a 3,600 square foot building could be 100 feet long by 36 feet wide, versus a 2-story unit, which only would be, if it was 1,800 square feet, 30 by 60. So it's a different dynamic there. And we'll work with Jason and Pam King on that one. But within that 3,600 square feet, you could do basically 4 types of building. But you would be doing that within a similar building envelope. So if you were doing a duplex, you could have 1,800 square feet per side of the duplex, but you would be limited to 6 bedrooms total, 3 in one duplex, 3 in the other duplex. If you wanted to look at an alternative development pattern in a triplex or a townhouse scenario, you're still limited to the 3,600 square feet, you're still limited to the 6-bedroom max, but you could have 3 2-bedroom units. If you wanted to go to a quad scenario, or 4 townhouses, and they could be stacked flats, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top, or townhouses, 4 in a row, you would be still limited by the 3,600 square foot footprint, and your maximum unit size, or it could be average unit size, would be 900 square feet per unit. So in essence, you'd be looking at 900 square foot, 1-bedroom or studio type units within a quadplex, but they would all read as a 3,600 square foot building. And that could end up being 32. We're continuing the discussions of what is an appropriately sized building there. So again, this is one of the ways or recommendations we can go to council, so that everybody understands that although the FB1 zone allows a quadplex or up to a 4-unit building, you're still limiting the size of the building and the number of bedrooms. I think some of the fears early on were that a quadplex could be 1,800 or 2,000 square feet times 4, where you could have an 8,000 square foot building with no limitations on footprint. So it could be 8,000 square feet on 1 floor, 8,000 square feet on 2. So we're trying to build some parameters to deliver some certainty with regards to what the maximum build out of a parcel could be within this zone or plot. So, and that's primarily the primary changes we're discussing, and then as we develop the footprints, we would adjust some of the drawings and some of those items in the preceding duplex, triplex, quadplex to make them match those square footages and discussions. So.
No, the red lights would be on if it was on.
Just push it. Now it's on.
Thank you. So I'm just curious as to how different lot size is going to be an effect on what's going to be built there.
So within the zone, you still would have front yard, side yard setbacks, buildable areas, height restrictions. So again, if you had, I'll just use an example. If you had a 5,000 square foot lot existing in the FB1 zone, you may not be able to fit a fourplex on it. You may only be able to fit a duplex on it. And you may have to get creative with how that fits on the lot. So again, it's not saying that just because a fourplex is allowed in the zone, we're still recommending with Able City East to limit the size of that structure to 3,600 square feet, potentially 1,800 square feet per floor or footprint, first floor elevation footprint. And then lot size determines whether or not it fits. You still got to fit the parking, you still got to fit the building, you still got to fit the setback, the landscaping and everything. Obviously, if you had a 10,000 square foot site, it would fit much easier to do that. But again, just because it's allowed doesn't mean it fits based on the lot size. And again, in discussion, someone could build a 3,600 square foot single family home. In fact, they could build a 5,000 square foot single family home if it fit within the setbacks of that zone.
Question. It appears that there's a graphic on that slide. I would find it, maybe it's just my brain, I would find it so much easier to see these numbers and these sizes in some sort of graphic representation. I have a hard time picturing what we're talking about.
One-dimensional graphic, like a triplex on a lot, how it would fit?
I don't know, maybe
Okay.
one-dimensional, maybe a two-dimensional. It's just I can't take the numbers and apply them to the different
Okay.
buildings. Is that-
I will provide you with a graphic that I've used before in my planning career of, in essence, it will take maybe a minimum lot or an average side lot within the FB. It'll apply the setbacks. It'll show you the building area that's left. It'll put, I'm going to blow this up a little bit for a moment. So, and I understand the point you're making, Liz, that, you know, what does building width of 18 to 36 mean? You know, what is what is the minimum run? We have the units. Here's the open space and yards with 10-foot minimums and all of this. I think what you're asking is, what does that look like on a lot? Yes. Okay. And we can potentially represent that graphically. Okay.
Susan?
I have a couple of questions, too. You were just talking about a quadplex. Can a developer comp permit a quadplex?
Developer can comp permit anything they imagine.
So the quadplex will fit these standards unless I claim one of them is, if one of them is affordable, then do all of the standards that you have right now become irrelevant?
Under a comprehensive permit, an applicant is allowed to seek relief to fulfill their application needs to supply affordable housing at a minimum of 25%. So again, you've seen it over and over again. A comprehensive permit allows a developer to seek relief from your standards. So the answer to your question is yes. In any scenario, anywhere in town, regardless of the contemplation of the form-based code, an applicant under a comp permit doesn't have to follow your standards.
So if we've developed these standards for this specific section of town, somebody could put in a big square gray box, do one affordable unit, and disregard our desired height, setback, lot coverage, architecture standards, like setbacks, everything, could be thrown out? And is there a way to then protect this form-based code neighborhood from an assault that would disregard what we're trying to do here?
I would say no, but Andy may want to add to that, but the comprehensive permit allows someone to deviate from your standards.
Same thing.
Okay, technically, they could deviate from those standards. But if you're allowing it as a use, and you're allowing it there, I don't know what sort of reasons they would be able to come up with that would justify, doing it. More likely, I guess, would be they would come in and want to have more than 4 units. Something like that, perhaps. But as far as the design standards per se, I don't know that there would be, a rationale for that. The stuff that you have is not significantly, you have your design standards, but it's not significantly more expensive than other construction. It's not like you're mandating all natural cedar shake shingles. So I think it would be unlikely to have an effect on that.
Just Susan, on the economic side of that, if you're allowing we'll just say a triplex, those 3 units can be all market rate. So we'll just put a $500,000 price tag on each one of those units. There's a value, once constructed, of $1.5 million. If they comp permitted the town to seek relief, one of those 3 units would have to be affordable, which would reduce the overall value of that to about maybe 1.2 or 1.3 million. They would lose $200,000 or $300,000 in value. So to Andy's point, the economic side of it may not make sense versus just following your rules, because following your rules mathematically is not a burden to the developer. Right? Most developers are doing it where they have enough density, they need the density to carry the affordable units. So, and on these small lots, someone could argue that, well, they'll do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. On the small lots, you may be that ambitious, but you can't park them. State law still requires you to do 1 space per unit. So if someone tried to do 8 units on 5,000 square feet, where do you put 8 cars? So I'm not overly concerned that someone will take the comprehensive permit route and try to densify what you're already adding density to with the form-based code.
Can you just go back to the map and show us there are 2 maps, but the one that shows where form-based code 1 is? The one with less lines is easier to actually see, which I think was the second map, but no, the next one.
There's,
That may not be labeled as well, actually. So maybe that one.
Yeah, we only had this one. I can
Okay.
blow it up a little bit. Just let me enlarge it.
So we had talked about Zone 1 as being an area that we had concerns with. So that, looking at this map, that is no longer part of it, or it's not purple, it's green? And then there's 1.5.
Yeah, so.
Didn't we suggest some modifications to that?
So FB1, your primary concern was what can occur in FB1 with regards to the increase in density associated with duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes,
Yeah.
which were initially contemplated in the code. So the way Able City East is attempting to address that is limiting the size of the building to a maximum size, and then proportionally coordinating or correlating the bedroom number as well as the size of the individual units within that zone. So in the FB1 right now, parts of the FB1 allow duplexes, they allow bed and breakfasts, and they allow multifamily household developments. Our regulations do not have a maximum size on a bed and breakfast. We do not have a maximum size on a single-family home. We do not have the maximum size on a duplex, nor do we have a maximum size on a multi-family household development. Either number of nor do we regulate the number of bedrooms. So to address the concern of someone building something substantially different and larger, their intent was to create a building envelope and allow flexibility within the building envelope. So, and again, I've had discussion, whether it's 3,200 square feet, which would be 1,600 square feet a unit, or 3,800 square feet, which is 1,900 square foot a unit, you could land somewhere there. If you go to 3,200 square feet, that means when you did a quad, you could have an 800 square foot unit. So you'd be at a small one bedroom or more studio-like, but it's still 4 units, and the community needs that type of entry housing also. So, but again, it's creating a maximum size for anything other than a single-family home on these smaller lots within the FB1 zone, so that it looks more like some of the housing that's already there, even though there are multifamily units.
You mentioned bed and breakfast. Would these continue to be allowed in this area?
I think
Because it's often a good use for a
I think
larger building.
I think the bed and breakfasts are still there. What the new code contemplated were country inns, and I believe the country inns are out. Because again, country inns at a different scale. So the single family look conversion to a B&B where it's owner occupied, I think everyone's still comfortable with that. There was some pushback on doing a larger version of a bed and breakfast in the nomenclature of a country inn.
And they would still be subject to the same process of a special use permit?
Under a form-based code, you're developing the parameters
That's why I asked.
for development as of right. No special use permits. You are determining what's acceptable and then creating the parameters for that in a detailed manner, and it moves forward.
Jamie, what's the western border? What's the western border of that, and what's the distinction? Why is it limited to that versus going maybe a little further left in the drawing you have?
On the FB1, Joe?
Yeah.
I think they were looking at one street west of Oak Street. And if we, I'm just going to blow that up. So the discussion is lots fronting on this westernmost street. This is a well-established neighborhood, slightly smaller lots. To the east, we get into slightly larger lots. I mean, if the planning board said, made a recommendation that they'd like to carry the FB1 all the way to the cross street with Stedman's and that intersection, that could be a recommendation that the planning board makes.
I mean, when I drive through that area, I haven't looked specifically with, an eye for this, but my general thought is that whole area is very similar in nature.
Yeah, there are subtle differences, but they are very similar. So again, that could be a recommendation of the planning board that on the northern side of Main Street, you could go all the way to, not quite the river, but Columbia Street, and then carry that south and just square that off. But again,
bear in
that's
mind, too,
something that wasn't initially contemplated.
There's a lot of really wet areas in that block that's not included as well,
Yeah.
between Oak Street and Columbia.
I don't know, I just think that, a lot of times when we make these changes to the zoning, they're kind of slow to be adopted, and not as many people take advantage of them as we would like to see, and we seem to be pretty limited in area right there. when it doesn't, in my mind, doesn't seem like a very big difference in that neighborhood.
Well, this area goes quite a bit west of where the original study area that came out of the URI project was. So we're already going quite a bit west from the Dale Carly intersection, because our focus was supposed to be on the commercial highway zone, which is from Dale Carly east. Go ahead.
So it looks like you're limiting duplexes to 3 bedrooms per unit? Is that what I understand? And does that mean that if this were to be adopted, that the recent duplex development would not have been permitted? The recent duplex development that
Yeah,
has
so-
everyone hopping up and down?
If the form-based code wasn't in existence and someone went to develop a vacant lot in a similar manner on Oak Street, that development would have been limited to 3,600 square feet total size for the unit, 3 bedrooms per duplex side for a total of 6 bedrooms max. That would be the maximum development capability of that single parcel as a duplex. So the short answer is 5 bedrooms, 10 total in the duplex would not be permitted under the form-based code if adopted.
Thank you. And then, if this were adopted the way it is, which level or locations would also have accessory dwellings permitted? Would that 3,600 single-family house also be able to do an accessory dwelling in the backyard? Does a duplex or anybody else get an accessory dwelling?
Part of that slide, again, I blew that up so everyone could see it, is Able City was making a recommendation that and it everything's up for discussion.
Jamie,
They recommend that the property could only have 1 accessory dwelling unit.
it's per state law,
Yeah.
any residential property has to allow 1 ADU.
So there's,
But a single family, not the duplex?
No.
Anything.
it's a property, not
So
this-
all of
Any
the,
residential use, even a multifamily, can have at least 1 ADU.
but it
And
does need to comply to all of those setbacks?
It,
Or
Yes.
are they, but there seem to have been a rash of waivers lately requested from the zoning board for setbacks for ADUs.
Again, when someone goes to the zoning board should be applying the hardship scenario. That's their responsibility. I'll defer to Andy to add to that. But again, to Brian's point, the law says that any residentially zoned property meeting the standards associated with the law has a right to build an accessory dwelling unit. So, Andy, do you have?
Yeah, there are limits on the, certainly, the key one is on a detached accessory dwelling unit. A new detached accessory dwelling unit has to have a lot of 20,000 square feet or more for it. I think we're talking about new development here, so we're not really talking about the garage being converted to an ADU or something like that. So the basic thing would be a 20,000 square foot lot required for it. It would have to comply, if it's new, it has to comply with the setbacks for other accessory structures. Yes, they can apply to the zoning board. We're seeing this in a lot of places, particularly what I've told the zoning boards I represent is that 20,000 square feet is not a black line, but it should be a dark gray line. Someone comes before you with 19,000 square feet, and maybe they're on a corner lot with setbacks that way or something like that, maybe that's an appropriate relief. But we've had people come in, with a 7,000 square foot lot, and they want to put an accessory dwelling unit in the rear yard. Basically, they want to have, a second house in the backyard. And as I've also told all the zoning boards, for people who are doing it inside an existing building, and yet they're expanding, so they're asking for relief, no matter what sob story they tell you about their aged grandmother, their daughter in a wheelchair, or whatever, who's going to live in it, it doesn't matter. It's not, because the law says once the ownership or the residency changes hands, it doesn't become revoked as an accessory dwelling unit. So it just becomes a rental unit. So anything that you're approving, you should assume at some point in time, it will probably become a regular rental unit. So that has caused some of the zoning boards to say no to some of the more outrageous proposals that are put before them.
Other thoughts, questions from folks?
I just
Kipper?
have a procedural question, really. What's the calendar for moving forward with this? When is the planning board submission with recommendations going to the town council?
Our goal would be in the next month or so, again, we're down staff, but our goal would be in the next month or so to solidify items like this. So we have the July 2025, a small white paper explaining what the planning board would like to amend to that, the transitional zones, the discussion on sizes of buildings, and then have the planning board, in essence, vote on that document. And once that is voted on, moving it over to the council. Once the planning board refers it to council, we're somewhat beholden to the council's calendar. Because again, this isn't an applicant or an application-driven change that we're beholding to time frames according to state law. This is self-imposed by the community, so we need to go forward with that. And again, I think what the council may want to do is have a workshop with Able City East before it gets to the council in a formal manner with a public hearing where it's more podium and
That's a very good
stage.
idea. And in that work session, Able City would be able to demonstrate, similar to what Liz was asking for, actual graphics,
Yes.
because that made a big difference with that 5-day public workshop
Yes. And
with the
again,
public.
the planning board has been involved in the workshops, involved in the reading the text at all of the meetings with Able City East. The council hasn't been involved in all of the workshops. They haven't been involved in the codification of the concept and the vetting of that and the discussions we've had at these workshops, along with bringing Able City East back. So I think there's another step between the planning board making recommendations, having Able City come back, having that workshop, so that the council is comfortable that when they bring it to a formal ordinance change in the zoning code, and this room is filled with people who may not be on team form-based code, the council understands what went into the creation of this, what went into the vetting of this, and why this is a regulatory option to move what is envisioned for Old Tower Hill Road forward. Because again, you will have property owners who will comment that this will negatively affect them, but this is a regulation that is being adopted and envisioned for the community, not necessarily contemplating the individual needs of each property owner within the district.
And to that end, how can whatever goes forward to the council easily demonstrate the, for a better term, trade-offs that the additional density and lot coverage also has requirements for better stormwater management, lighting, landscaping, and so on.
Yeah, I think a part of Able City's role, we'll call it job, will be to articulate the benefits of adopting a new code, which potentially outweigh individual landowners' potential opposition to that, because this is a regulation that impacts the community as well as every individual landowner within the district. So, it's multifaceted, but I think one thing we can say is, without doing something, you have what you have, and you will continue to receive applications that mimic your existing development pattern. With the planning board doing their best to try and improve on the quality of development within the corridor, but not necessarily have the regulatory tools available to them to make that happen. So if someone on the corner of Main and Main wants to build a really big modern gas station with 6 pump islands and a substantial canopy, that's potentially allowed under the existing code. Without any architectural standards, with minimal landscaping standards, without any public space, and parking up front, building to the rear, really only limited by setbacks and building height. So that's your trade-off. To do nothing means you continue to get the development patterns you've decided the community doesn't like.
So I'm trying to get a better idea of what is our process from here, from today, to the day that we submit the proposal to the town council with our recommendation.
So first, there's an internal job that's from the planning department to, again, I'll call it a white paper, to propose all of the changes that the planning board would like to make to the July 2025 code. Changing the portion of the district's western portion of Main Street. It's actually the eastern portion of Main Street in town, but from Citizens Bank to Stedman's to a transitional zone, recognizing the importance of some of the historic natures of the buildings, and the code ends up addressing that by pulling it out of the FB1 and treating it differently. By solidifying what can be done in the FB1 to eliminate country inns, put building parameters on things above single family up to quads, and articulating that as a change to the code. And then any other small changes with building fenestration in the commercial zone, public-private spaces, which we're working through, and give that to the planning board, who will then, thumbs up, thumbs down. These are the changes that we agree need to be made to the base code as it goes to council. Now, the choice could be made that that's what the planning board wants done, and you roll that into the code, but I think what you want change is, I want to call it minor in nature. It's not substantial, right? It's something less than big, substantial overhaul to the July draft. They're minimal tasks.
No, I get that, but it's also detailed. So what I'm trying to figure out is, so I've read the July 2025
Yes.
version. We've had discussions. We've heard what the changes are, but I'm a very stubbornly literal person, and so I haven't read that. How are the proposed
So
changes?
the changes that
Are the
will be,
recommendations.
the recommendations that will be made or accepted by the planning board will be codified. So it will say, change FB1 along Main Street to FB 1.5 / and rename to transitional zone. within that district, make the following changes too, so that you can see exactly what those are. They won't
So
be.
it's going to be like a separate document
Yeah.
delineating the proposed...
They won't be
Okay.
aspirational.
Yeah.
It's not an aspirational document. It is, we are making the following codified changes.
We're making concrete recommendations.
Yes.
And we're going to be looking at the existing text and the proposed concrete recommendations as two separate documents. We're not going to be looking at like a track change version? No, okay.
No.
So we must have some target dates for when we're going to submit them. I'm curious as to when we're going to receive the drafts of the proposals that we're going to, this is highly detailed stuff.
Yes.
And in order for me to really assess it and go through and make sure that I have no further comments or decide how I'm going to vote, I'm going to need something more than
Again,
4 days.
we would.
And I'm happy to start working now,
Yeah.
but I just don't have any sense of what our timeline is or what I'm going to be asked to do or when.
I understand what you're asking, Caper. What's difficult for us to do with the permit load we have right now and being down a staff person is try and get a hard date. My objective would be to have something to you for your December workshop. Not December, sorry, January workshop. That's got a big asterisk on it. You know, Brian and I were talking about it today, and we probably jinxed ourselves, and I mentioned it to Lynn. December doesn't look too bad with what's in the new permitting queue. But we also joked that could change tomorrow.
And we
right?
only have one meeting
But
in
it's-
December, so January kind
if-
of makes more sense.
If we get, we're basically 2 planners in the office processing applications right now. We can handle the workload we have now, but if we get the same workload dumped on us in December, going into January, that we're handling right now, is going to be very challenging to find the hours to bring the form-based code across the finish line for you in January.
I'm very sympathetic with your workload. I'm also concerned about mine.
Yes.
So if we get the review documents 3 days or 4 days before the work session, I'm going to be struggling. So is there a way?
I think your point
Yeah,
has
so,
been made
Cable, what
clear.
But I think the
From my
question is,
perspective, if staff gave them to you 2 days before the next work session, there is no expectation from staff for you to review and vote on them that night at the work session. That we would walk you through some of the changes and give you adequate time to fully look, review, and be comfortable with.
but is the July 2025 version available right now?
Yes,
For me to run through it, I got to refresh myself.
it's been sent
And
to
make-
everyone.
I think we have it.
Okay, so we can, and it's not been changed since we got it.
We are not changing
So we
that.
have the leisure now to go through and sort of mark it up.
Oh, wait, yeah, we did
Yeah.
that already.
I forgot what I did.
Yeah, you've had the July 2025 since July.
I don't know if I'd call it leisure, but I know what you're talking about.
Well, if a caper's worried about last-minute Lucy, then we do have some time now.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why I don't want to keep changing the July 2025 document. That's the base document everybody can work off of.
No, I'm good with that. I just wanted to get an understanding of what our documents are going to look like and what our time frame is going to be. So I'm good.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on to the next item? All right, let's move on to municipal infrastructure capacity sewer water discussion.
So, Madam Chair, I've had some brief discussions with DPS and Rich Bourbonnais and Mark Convoy. I know Mark may have just some brief items for you tonight in a low-level discussion, and this is the start of a discussion. So, Mark?
Okay, I'd like to start with the capacity of the wastewater treatment facility. That's what we started looking into this week. The wastewater treatment facility has a capacity of 5 million gallons per day. It currently operates about at half that rate, based over a period of a year. However, you would think that there would be a lot of available capacity for new developments if we're only running at half capacity. However, you have to look at the peak usage as well. The peak usage is measured by taking the highest 3-month average flow. So we looked at what that flow rate would be and how early that came within our records. So if I looked at the year 2024, March, April, and May were the peak months, and that added up to that bumped us up to a 78% capacity rate at that time. The problem is that DEM requires that peak usage must not be greater than 80% of the capacity rate. So we're very close to that rate already. So a new development, say for instance like a 311 unit development, and if you average 1.5 bedrooms per unit, that would bump up the number another percent. So we would be in the 79% range, very close to the 80% maximum peak usage range. So the treatment facility needs to be looked at a little further. There is a problem with the way it's used because it's run by it's used by 3 different entities: the town of Narragansett, and University of Rhode Island. We all have different rates of quotas. The town of South Kingstown has the highest quota rate, so we control, I believe it's around 42% of the capacity of the treatment facility. The town of Narragansett has the smallest quota. However, they contribute the most flow into the treatment facility, and that's most likely due to infiltration through their pipelines of groundwater. So that's an issue that somehow has to get resolved, but the town has no way of resolving something that's from another town.
Mark, how is it governed? I mean, you have a board that, if Narragansett wanted to increase, is there a board that says yes or no, or how is it governed?
As far as the quota between the usage of the town and the University of Rhode Island, you mean? Or the usage of operation?
So if any town wanted to make it's going to increase their capacity, right? They're constantly increasing their capacity. Every time you add a house, you increase their capacity. Is there a board that governs that and looks at each entity, and are they at their limit?
Or a legal document that governs how this works?
I'm not sure. All I know is there's a set quota for everyone, and it's been in place for I don't know how long. It hasn't changed. However, again, the town of Narragansett has the most usage and the least quota. So they're the ones that are pretty much putting us over the limit, closer to the 80% capacity.
Are they going over their quota?
They're going well over their quota.
I think the real question is who's looking at how use is compared to the quota, and what government is there in shape to ensure that there is no surpassing of your quota?
I can't answer that question at this time. I can just tell you the numbers right now and where we're at.
Mark, it's okay, I got a couple more questions. If you don't have the answer, that's fine. It's just what I'm interested in. When you talked about peak capacity, you gave a 3-month period of time. Is there a peak capacity associated with per day? So
Well, the
can have
peak-
some type of capacity, how much you can treat what's coming in.
Right. Because this is governed by Rhode Island DEM through our RIPD's permit, that's the standard of peak usage. So it's tied to our permit to discharge.
So just in general, what I'm interested in is that if we got into a situation where in order to put in order to use additional capacity, we had to look at perhaps having a large developer go to a time-based dosing versus a social dosing. Meaning, they would have to have some holding tanks on site and then maybe pump at nighttime when you're not running at the same capacity. So I'm trying to understand that, but I guess it's also interesting. I guess I don't really understand. It seems like that's something that the town council should be looking at when another town's above its capacity and significantly may limit our capacity, especially if you're saying that at the peak it was 79% and maximum you're supposed to be at 80%. And I'm just trying to understand how this all relates to when we think about increasing density and where we increase density and all that. And it seems already raising more questions.
Right. We figured it would be raising more questions, but we just wanted to bring you up to speed as far as where we are at the capacity rate.
Very interesting. Were you surprised that it was not June to August?
No, because it's tied to, those peaks were tied to the fall and the spring seasons when there was a very high amount of rain.
Andy, have you heard anything similar to these kinds of situations in other communities?
Well, yes, I mean, everybody's dealing with the I&I problem, the infiltration of the sewer systems, whether it be just from leaky pipes or sump pumps being pumped into the sewer. And I think that's interesting here. It's quite telling. If it were just population and people, it would clearly be the summer when the demand, but it's not. It's the rainfall issues. So that's pretty clear. I am aware that the town has been talking with URI about jointly trying to get a little bit tougher with Narragansett and, get them to resolve their issues on this. Which might include, renegotiating the agreement. Right now, what they've been doing right now, I gather, is they kind of short-term have been buying the extra capacity that URI was not using, so that they're technically not in violation of the agreement because they're subcontracting that. But that's not a good long-term solution. And of course, the big thing is once you reach capacity, the capital expenses of increasing capacity are significant.
We also have to recognize that URI is putting in a lot more housing units, a lot.
Which is why they're concerned. I think they still have plenty of capacity, but they're not going to be able to keep providing Narragansett with excess capacity. So Narragansett's going to have to do something, which they have so far shown a reluctance to do.
Can I just clarify something I think I heard, which is URI is not increasing the amount of students on campus, they're simply redistributing the students that are presently on campus from tri-units down to doubles. Like it'll be the same amount of kids on campus, it'll just be spread in a different way?
No, their dorm program nets out at 750 additional beds.
Right, but I did hear that they are taking all those triples and turning them back into doubles and then moving kids around. That it's actually not increasing the amount of kids on campus because it's not increasing their parking demand. It's keeping the same number of kids on campus, just redistributing them.
Well,
No.
no, my
Okay.
understanding is that they've got several different housing proposals underway. The graduate student housing, I believe you're correct, that they're changing the configuration of the housing, so they're modifying the housing, so we're not anticipating that they will be housing more graduate students, but there is an additional development component that goes to undergraduates, and those are new on-campus beds.
So they're talking about creating a gross total of like 11 or 1,200 beds. But they're also going to be getting rid of some of their older dormitory facilities and doing what you're saying, reallocating so that some of the triples become doubles. What it nets out as is 750 additional new beds on top of what they currently have today.
Without eliminating any beds from those triples. It was,
Well, no,
it was definitely a URI inside source that told me that that was their plan, was that they're not creating new
So
beds.
Susan,
So
if
they
Brian-
have said
yeah.
they are not tying this to an increase in enrollment, if that's what you mean. So yes, some of the students would be coming from them trying to reduce the number of triples that they have.
To Brian's point, there's a gross and a net. So they're building, we'll say, a gross of 1,200 new units. But the net result of that is the addition of 750 new beds, because there's a number in there of removing triples and moving those over. So that student's already accounted for in a bed. So,
Question related to this, has there been any discussion about having a future town gown meeting? We used to have them every year.
I
Town
believe-
gown, so it was South Kingstown with the university.
Yeah, that's typically been an annual event, worked through with the town council and town manager's office. I don't know when the next one is scheduled.
Okay. Would be great to encourage that from your end if possible. Any other questions for Mark?
That was the wastewater, right? Are you gonna look at some of the individual sections in town and let us know the capacity there?
Different sections of town.
It'd be nice if we saw a map of the town or the sewer district, and then have a rough idea, very rough, we're close to 100% here, we're 25% there, we're 50% there, just so that as we're talking about and considering increasing densities, we know which areas from an infrastructure could facilitate that and which areas wouldn't. So if we had a sewer map and you just kind of give us a really rough idea, up here in West Kingston, we're at 25%. Over here on Oak Street, we're, on Main Street, we're 90%. Just kind of a very rough, in my mind, would be helpful for this board.
Joe, are you talking now about, rather than the capacity of the treatment center, the capacity of the
Of
pipes?
areas within the town. So once we get past the treatment center, then we have to look at the infrastructure and the pipes and know where in the town could have additional densities and where we couldn't have additional densities without increasing the pipe size.
Right, we also have to be looking at the pump stations as well, the capacities there.
Yeah.
We haven't even started on that, so.
Well, thank you for giving us that initial overview. And as you know, there has been a lot of concern in the community about water availability and the water ban. And I believe at one of the recent town council meetings, one of the water companies expressed their thoughts that the problem with the water was due to industrial uses, of which we have very few, and agriculture and lack of water conservation. And that seemed to be somewhat of a myopic kind of view. Is this something that more research will go on from the town's perspective? I mean, I think we all understand we have more than one water company, but again, the availability of water, particularly as you made the reference to the seasonality of rainwater and what we're dealing with climate impacts. Is that something that you'll be looking into?
I would hope the water districts would be looking into that pretty much. I wouldn't be looking into
Mhm.
that, but I would be hopeful with them. That's something they should be looking
And-
into, I would think.
Yes, and then there'd have to be some kind of general conversation between departments related to that.
It would seem to me that this needs to be concerted with new development, that we're losing too much of our recharge water in storm drains, right, instead of that water soaking in. And so maybe as a town, we can insist that all developments have better water retention systems.
Well, when we have new developments, we do look at recharge with stormwater. That's part of the requirements of stormwater rates and volumes that they match pretty much. So yeah, we're already on that track.
Any other thoughts? So obviously, we want to keep this conversation moving forward because planning and the nature of the comprehensive plan and the varied elements within that, which leads me to our next item, long-range planning, cumulative impact, and comprehensive planning. We've had several concerns raised by board members as we look at individual project reviews, and then we have our work sessions, which are targeting overall comprehensive planning. We have the varied elements in the comprehensive plan. How can we better utilize the goals and policies contained within the comprehensive plan, which demonstrate the connection between land use, transportation, all the varied elements as we move forward, so that it doesn't seem as though that our heads are in the sand and we're looking at things through a silo.
As you look at me,
Well, I knew you'd be able to chat about that.
I think part of it is understanding the comprehensive community plan, which was adopted in 2021, which is your guiding document on the future growth of the community. And I think the community, as well as the planning board, did a good job developing that plan. The plan didn't suggest substantial changes to your zoning regulations as it relates to, redistricting your residential zones or reclassifying those areas. It primarily focused on Old Tower Hill Road and changing items there to allow density there. The difficulty in what you've faced in the last 2 or 3 years is the comprehensive permit process, which is allowed under state law. No different than the affordable housing legislation in Massachusetts or Connecticut, New York, or New Jersey, that those permitting processes allow developers to deviate from that long-range planning. So if you've decided that, we'll use an example, all the density for residential should show up on Fairgrounds Road and Liberty Lane, and that's in your plan of conservation and development, and a developer buys a piece of land a half a mile from there and comp permits you, that's something you can't plan for, you didn't contemplate in your plan, and I don't know how to contemplate that in a plan, because you're not anticipating something that is done that allows you to circumvent zoning, right? South County Commons is another good example. That is a regulatory planned area. It is a regulatory permitted area at a specific density, and then an applicant submitted a comp plan which changed all of that. Even simple things, Matunic, you had a potential plan density in Matunic, and then you got a comp plan. So it's difficult through the update of a plan or redo of a plan every 10 years to contemplate that one-off, that you don't know where it's landing, all right? You can contemplate things like the redevelopment of the municipal sites. You're somewhat in control of that. You can put that in the plan. You can contemplate the long-term implications of increased density on Old Tower Hill Road, the revitalization of Main Street in Peacedale and Wakefield, but you can't, I'll give you a prime example. The nursery on the southern portion of Main Street's on the market right now. That's zoned either R40 or R80. So your long-range plan contemplates a specific density for that. What?
You're talking about the old Stewart Nursery.
Yeah. I'm
not
just
really
using
on
that as.
Main
I
Is
think
that
that,
part of
I
Main
thought that was
Street?
deed protected,
bear
he sold
with
his
me.
development
I'm
rights.
using that as an example because it's a piece of land that zones something that may end up being something other than that. Then again, there's some restrictions there. But it's also not clear what the comprehensive plan allows them to unrestrict. The comprehensive permit process allows them to deviate from standards. So if they've sold development rights or it's protected through another entity, that's a different story. But if it's controlled through a regulatory aspect at the local level, the comprehensive permit potentially changes that. So those are the things that are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to plan for. And I think that's what's frustrating to the planning board. Right? We look at West Kingstown. We all know where the West Kingston Park is. You have turf fields surrounding that. There's some large tracts of land there. You've contemplated that R200. But if someone were to acquire one of those parcels and they weren't deed restricted and they hadn't sold the development rights, they could submit a comp permit and change the density that isn't contemplated in your long-range comprehensive plan. It isn't contemplated in a build-out analysis or a sewer capacity analysis because you can't predict that, right? We can predict what's in the zoning code. We can predict what we're proposing to do on Old Tower Hill Road and the density that will become Old Tower Hill Road. But I can't predict someone comp permitting you on Old Tower Hill Road either, right? So that's the difficult and frustrating part of what we do.
Absolutely. Those are really good points, all true, and it's almost like zoning is now a moving target, and rather than having any kind of predictability or stability, you don't have that. So how then do you connect the dots and try to do big picture, systems thinking kind of analysis? Is anyone out there doing a build-out, or any of the other communities that we know of attempting a build-out analysis?
Again, a lot of communities look at a build-out community. So there was a build-out analysis done in 2018, 2019. It's part of the comprehensive community plan. And to do a new one, Brian and I could probably sit at a table. We were literally talking about this in the last week or so in our office. Between 2018 and 2025, we could probably sit around the table and figure out how many new units were built and where they were built. And there's no change to your build-out analysis because zoning hasn't changed. If you contemplated changing the R200 to R40, do a build-out analysis of all that acreage, but you haven't changed your underlying zones. You're still R10, R20, R30, R40, R80, R200. None of that has changed really in the last 20 years. So a new build-out analysis, the dynamics of that hasn't changed. The only area you're contemplating changing is Old Tower Hill Road and increasing density, and that's so small that it doesn't have a exponential effect on the build-out analysis for the entire community with a proposed number of units and overall population over time. So I don't have an answer for you, Maria. Other communities are grasping with that. I literally, every day I get pinged by the Hartford Current with 169 municipalities in Connecticut of another community almost on a weekly basis who's contemplating in Connecticut an 830G or a large apartment complex in a suburban community or even an urban community just outside of the urban core, because that's where land is developed. And they're proposing 100 and 200 and 300 unit developments in traditional single-family neighborhoods or on the backside of traditional urban-style development where it abuts that single-family neighborhood. If someone's familiar with Manchester, Connecticut, and where the Buckland Hill malls are, and where the J.C. Penney major distribution center would be, there's strip commercial there. Someone's just proposing another 300 or 400 units behind that, directly abutting single-family. That's getting the same pushback as if it would be in any community in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, because it's different. But the 830G, that comprehensive permit process in Connecticut called 830G, allows a developer to deviate where a town has planned for a different style and density of development. So I don't think there's a planner who has an answer of how to contemplate that. You know, the only thing we potentially could do is look at vulnerable properties in town, but that's basically vacant or underdeveloped parcels, right? And there are a lot of those in town. So.
And certainly, we should look at areas that are considered more environmentally sensitive, areas where we have either groundwater protection or groundwater recharge areas. I mean, it's foolish not to do that at this point
And I think
in time.
the key is you've already planned for those in your zoning classifications and your long-range planning and the comprehensive community plan, but
They're moot.
they're moot,
Yep.
right? They're moot. You take a property like Roy Carpenter's, right? Which either is still on the market or has been sold, but the sale hasn't taken place. A developer could have bought that and then comp permitted the community and changed it from what was traditional seasonal to something much more dense.
Yeah.
But we can't, it's hard to plan for that.
Yep, right, yep.
It's hard to plan
exactly.
for that.
Any other thoughts from other board members who have repeatedly brought these issues up?
If someone has a solution, I'm willing to learn.
Or at least a way forward. I mean, as Jamie said, we're not the only community that's faced with this. Are there any other communities that are trying to take steps to better plan for the future, to get a handle on these issues? Because
Andy,
it
do you have any
basically,
insight?
No, I mean, I actually think, South Kingstown has been ahead of the curve for a long time. Decades ago in, working on the, essentially your urban services boundary with where the water services was, calling for increased development here in Wakefield to protect the turf farms. So I think, I think you're fairly good at it. I think the only thing that I see that's new that probably should be looked at if you want to, again, get ahead of it is the transit-oriented development, which has been enacted by the General Assembly as a pilot program, and nothing has been issued yet, no regs or anything have been forthcoming. But, theoretically, it will call for, it identifies the Kingston Railway Station as a major transit center and talks about density of 12 units of acre, I think, within quarter mile of an eighth of a mile, I forget which, of that site. And you do have sewers out that way with West Kingstown. So that's, to my way of thinking, You know, that might be a place to get ahead of it. That might be a place to say, okay, well, we can put housing here. This would be a sense of where to put it, because we've got the possible infrastructure. And particularly if it's coming anyway from the state, let's try to get ahead of it. Although saying that, the state works so slow, you can still get ahead of it at South Kingstown speeds.
Yeah, provided that it doesn't diminish our future drinking water capacity. You know, it's complicated. Anything from anyone else? Susan? Caper? No. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. Updates from planning board members, liaison to various boards, committees, projects, and activities. Affordable housing?
There was a meeting, it was rescheduled. There was a meeting, it was on a rescheduled time, but it was dedicated specifically to the Fairgrounds Road. I talked to Brian, and it didn't seem was necessary for me to attend, so I think that they're going to be, they want to come in front of the planning board, right, or submit a letter to us.
They intend on submitting a letter
Yeah.
associated with their stance on Fairgrounds Road.
And are there other advisory letters forthcoming from any other committees? We used to get them from the Conservation Commission, but haven't
On
had-
Fairgrounds or on?
Or anything,
Yeah.
anything else we used to
the-
hear from.
Probably the only other letters that I know are being worked on in a broad sense are letters associated with the establishment of the form-based code. I think EDC's working on a letter. I know the
Okay.
Bike Ped Committee just discussed it the other night. Dorothy Hill had a few questions for me that I tried to respond to, so they brought it up at their meeting. So potentially the result of those discussions from BPAC as well as EDC, and I think Affordable Housing is also planning at some point to weigh in on form-based code, either supporting with some caveats, but again, they're reviewing changes that the planning board and town council are contemplating. Brian, did I miss anything on our boards or commissions, I think?
No, except I think affordable housing may have already weighed in on the form-based code.
Okay.
I think they sent a letter to council. I'll have to look it up.
That sounds familiar.
We saw it.
Yeah, I think we saw something like that, which is good.
And then just from a staff standpoint, we did attend the Grow Smart Rhode Island's Main Street workshop a month ago. There is potentially an application that we will submit on behalf of the town to participate in the cohort training that'll be discussed Monday night at the town council meeting. Again, we would be looking for 4 to 6 volunteers from the community on the economic development side, on the business owner side, concerned citizen who's in love with upgrading, maintaining, and improving our Main Street corridors and cores in the town, Chamber of Commerce representatives. I think there may be 1 or 2 there. We're also recommending that someone from the planning department goes through that cohort training too.
So I understand, and many of us went to that initial Main Street meeting, and it's a Grow Smart endeavor, but it's not something that the town is doing per se. Is that correct? Due to the nature of the process and staff capacity, et cetera?
We are trying to engage and help shepherd an application for the cohort. Long-term, the success of the Main Street programs have to be community-orientated and driven by the businesses and the economic players within your corridor or your main streets. It's one thing for, if we had an economic development department, a planning department, a full-blown zoning department with tons and tons of staff, if a bunch of professionals sat on the committee, we all have wonderful ideas, but we're not the people actually there day to day, working 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week, some 7. They need to want to do this for themselves. And the ultimate goal of most main streets is to form a 501(c) corporation. That corporation would then either hire some sort of part-time or full-time staff. They are responsible for the funding. In some communities, that comes from your utility companies or a large employer or entity within the community, as well as some funding from the municipality. But again, it's got to be driven by the community. We're trying to shepherd it and help it along, but ultimately,
Okay, that makes sense.
not play a primary role. I know when
Yeah.
I was the planning director in Simsbury, I would occasionally attend and give updates to the Main Street members. They had a board of directors, they had a Main Street coordinator, Sarah Nielsen, who was an absolute wonder and joy to work with and on top of her game, but it was driven by the business community, separate from the municipality.
Great, that was my question. We had a meeting last night of the Landscape Subcommittee and are eagerly moving forward with developing areas that began with the table of contents and will be meeting regularly after that. Thank you, Jamie, for being there. We're pretty positive about potential outcomes of that. The statewide planning training this past Saturday, would anyone that was there like to comment on?
I thought they did an excellent job of updating us on a number of issues. The keynote speaker I found particularly interesting because it was Jeffrey Lampert, yeah. He did a wonderful job, I thought, of explaining to non-lawyers the responsibilities of finding facts and applying the law to the facts. And it really underscored the importance of putting together the record. And it actually provoked my thinking about what we could do to improve our process in some regards. Then the other thing was the planning department has launched stormwater training, and they gave a very, very nice they focused on how that was developed, and then they gave us a tour, really, of how some of that training works. And frankly, I thought it looks very, very exciting. So I think that I haven't gone on site, I haven't started the training, but I actually think it's going to be a positive computer experience, and I have very few positive computer experiences these days. So all in all, I thought it was significantly better than last year, and I thought that they really listened to the feedback that people gave them. So I thought it was very positive. I don't know.
And those of us that filled out the survey received a thumb drive, which I forgot to bring tonight, so we would be able to share that with folks that weren't there.
I have mine.
Okay. Oh, good.
I have one too that I'm happy to share, but I don't
Okay.
have it with me.
Great.
Maria, was it recorded?
Yes. Yes, it was recorded.
Okay.
It's not yet available, but eventually it's expected to be available.
When,
It's not,
Excellent.
it wasn't with a technician in each room, per se. It was the hotel recording system, but they were being recorded.
And that included the keynote speaker as well?
I believe so, yes.
Excellent.
Yep.
I think that would be very helpful for board
Yeah,
members.
I mean, I myself am very interested in the Historic District Program, which I obviously had to miss since I was doing the zoning program. but-
Exactly. I felt the same way. All right, update from planning staff, general update, staffing activities, budget, capital improvement program.
So we'll try and take those one at a time. Capital Improvement Program, we have carryover funding in place for update, or the structural reorganization of our existing code, continuing with form-based code initiatives. So we're actually not asking for any additional funds this year because we have already been allocated funds over our 5 to 6 year program. So we're well funded on the next set of projects that the planning department has to take on. Budgeting is starting already for next fiscal year, so we'll be looking at that. We advertised for the replacement of Mr. Parker as a deputy planner. That closed on Friday. We have 9 respondents. We're going through those resumes now, and hopefully we'll interview in the next 2 weeks, hoping potentially the week after Thanksgiving, if not immediately the Monday or Tuesday following that, so that we hope to be fully staffed coming into the new year or just after that. And I want to thank Brian, who is picking up some of the slack with Jay no longer with us, and Jay in the private sector, and we wish him well. And also Lynn Smith and Tracy Owens in our department for 4 people doing the work of 5.
Or 6.
Maybe 6.
Do you have a sense of the time frame from the beginning of the budget process to when it might be adopted? I only ask because it definitely impacts the town council's availability, say for work sessions with us or what have you.
Some of the initial capital improvement program starts actually in December. I can get a calendar to everyone, but I know a lot of the budget hearing information, I believe, is in February. So again, we may have some opportunities for a January work session. But that calendar will come out, I think, in the next 2-3 weeks of what the council has for their meeting schedule as well as their budget schedule.
Okay. Let's move on then to update on legal issues, which includes upcoming training and land use regulation.
Well, no, there isn't any more upcoming training. We've shot the wad over the last couple of weeks here. The regular training you already heard about for the planning board. Your sea level rise training will now be this new stuff online. So that will be easy for you. For anyone who doesn't have that, you need to, I think that's 2 hours every 2 years. So you can get that. And then for the, if you've been at any of these other ones, you've picked up your hour training for this year. Or if you were there Saturday and didn't have it, that's just counted as 3 hours. But they'll continue probably starting in January with the Zoom training for 3-hour sessions for new people who need it, or 1-hour sessions coming up there. If desired, Amy or I could do a session in the spring, try to combine it from multiple boards, maybe, do a session there, if desired, in person. I'm thinking we'll definitely do one in the East Bay, so maybe we do one in the East Bay and one in the West Bay.
That'd be great.
So, but that will probably be a bit into the spring.
It's always nice to have that opportunity to have the in-person type of training, because it's so much better for Q&A than
Right,
Zoom.
and you can ask us specific questions, and we won't say, "Oh, ask your local solicitor." So,
Right,
yep, we can do that.
great.
So, And local land use stuff, not really, other than perhaps what I've said about the TOD stuff. But who knows what will happen with the legislature. Other than the fact that I expect there to be another package of multiple bills, I don't know anything more. The only other hunch I have is that maybe historic district zoning might be next on the list, which would, that's the only thing that I see that they've missed so far. There'll probably be more tweaks to things that have come and gone already.
They certainly haven't addressed climate, even though there is a commission that's studying climate change
Yeah.
and potential actions. Okay, thank you. Anything else from anyone? Motion to adjourn? From Liz, second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Unanimous. Thank you, everyone.